Hello everyone and a very good afternoon. My name is Annie and I'll be your host for this webinar today. Thank you very much for joining us to discuss institution-wide responses to disclosures of sexual violence and Epigeum's new online course to support staff and student leaders. We should be taking about 45 minutes of your time today, including an opportunity for a designated questions and answer session at the end. So firstly, just a couple of introductions. We're joined today by our course reviewer, Dr Nicola Henry, and Tessa Dagley from Epigeum's commissioning team, and I'll let them introduce themselves now, beginning with Nicola on the left.
Hi, I'm Nicola Henry. I'm an Associate Professor and Vice-Chancellor's Principal Research Fellow in the Centre for Global Research at RMIT University.
Hello, I'm Tessa Dagley. I'm Associate Commissioning Editor at Epigeum, and I worked closely with Nicola on the development of the Responding to Disclosures programme.
Okay, thanks both. And finally, that's me on the right. I'm a Product Manager at Epigeum and I work in the marketing team to help universities promote our courses internally. So just a quick look at the agenda before we get started. First, we'll look at Epigeum itself, and we're the organisation that put together transformative online courses for the higher education sector through a unique collaborative model. Then we'll move on to Nicola's presentation, who will tell us more about the recent developments in addressing sexual assault on campus and how it's likely to progress. Following this, Tessa will provide an overview of Epigeum's comprehensive and interactive online course and also provide a brief demonstration. And then we'll wrap up with a Q&A session. Okay, so firstly, just a quick overview of Epigeum for those who haven't heard about us before. And the company was founded in 2005 as a spin-out originally from Imperial College London, and our two founders created the company in response to what they felt was a lack of timely support for researchers. They saw this as an opportunity to work with universities to create accessible and interactive supported material for researchers. Over the years, we've expanded to courses for students and teaching and leadership programs for staff. We were acquired by Oxford University Press 2 years ago, who are a division of Oxford University and a non-for-profit organisation in a higher education context. And we've created over 173 online courses across 28 different programmes, and we currently have a number more in development. We're an increasingly globally focused organisation and have worked with over 300 universities across 32 different countries worldwide. And this map just illustrates the international spread of universities who have used our courses. So now I'd just like to show a short video to give you a visual introduction to our collaborative course development process.
The story of an Epigeum course. We come up with an idea and we consult widely to develop and fine-tune it. We commission a team of expert authors to write it and a team of expert reviewers to help them. We commission a lead advisor who gives strategic vision and leadership. And we bring together a team of universities who form a development group to give feedback on our plans and prototypes and to make sure the product meets their needs. The collaborations we build are drawn from across the world and often involve input from over 50 academics, as well as our team of in-house specialists. Because we believe that collaboration and iteration are the key to producing truly innovative and effective products. So we bring everyone together for a launch workshop at the start of each project. It's a great mixing pot where the creative juices can flow and expertise can be shared. We provide a week-long training course for our writing team to make sure they're able to get the best out of the online medium. And we provide plenty of opportunities for sampling and feedback along the way through a detailed peer review process. In fact, a typical product goes through at least 5 iterations before it's ready to be built by our in-house developers. Together, we're more than the sum of our parts, and our unique and rigorous product development process gives all collaborators access to groundbreaking courses they couldn't have created alone.
Okay, so just to quickly summarise the content of the video here. Our collaborations form a development group of universities which come together and share their experience at a workshop to help us create a really high quality online resource. We recruit authors, all under the guidance of a lead advisor, and then the advisory team we put in place lead and shape the vision alongside our team. We have a meticulous review process which allows the development group to look at the content of the courses, check that it matches their expectations, and peer review the material. And the development group of universities are the early adopters who get to use the material when it's first published and implement the courses at their universities. And I'd just like to briefly touch on implementation here, which is how the course can be used at your institution. And this is in a number of different ways. So firstly, it can be used as a standalone academic course. So it can be accessed at the time and place someone needs it. Secondly, we have the option for tutor-supported online courses. And finally, it can be used as part of a blended learning programme. And typically how this works is that participants are given access to the online course ahead of a workshop, and then the workshop would really focus on consolidation and application of the material. So hopefully that's given you a bit of background to Epigeum and how we put our online courses together, and I'd be happy to take any questions on that process. But for now, I'll move on to discussion around disclosures of sexual violence in higher education. And we thought it would be best to lead with a poll to hear your thoughts and get the discussion going, as these webinars really work best when they're interactive. So I'll just bring up the first question for everyone. So firstly, we'd like to know a bit more about your own experiences. And so have you ever received a disclosure yourself? So I'll just give you a little bit more time to fill that in. Okay, and I think we've had most people voted. So I'll move on to the second question now. If you've answered yes, how confident did you feel in responding? Okay, so this is the answer to the first one, and it looks like there's a really good split between people that did feel confident and people that didn't. And then moving on, again, it seems that a lot of people felt confident, some people didn't feel so confident, and some people didn't feel very confident at all. So that's really interesting, and thanks for sharing your thoughts with us. So that leads very nicely into Nicola's presentation now. So she'll discuss the current context in more detail.
Thanks, Annie, and thanks for attending today's webinar. For my segment of the webinar, I'll start by discussing global and local statistics on sexual violence before then focusing on the 2016 Australian Human Rights Commission survey on sexual harassment and sexual assault at Australian universities. I'll then finish up my part of the webinar by talking about the types of things that are important in the near, short-term and long-term future. So let's quickly go through some global statistics on sexual violence. Findings across various country and multi-country studies on sexual violence point to what the World Health Organization has described as a pervasive global public health problem of epidemic proportions. So in a recent study in 2013, the World Health Organization found that overall 35% of women worldwide reported having experienced either physical and or sexual violence by a partner or sexual violence by a friend, family member, acquaintance or stranger. Like everywhere else in the world, sexual violence is also extremely common in Australia. So the Australian Bureau of Statistics reported back in 2012 that 1 in 5 Australian women, or 17%, and 1 in 22 men, or 4%, had experienced sexual assault since the age of 15. And these statistics are roughly similar to the stats in the England and Wales, a study done in 2016 that found that 19.9% of women and 3.6% of men had experienced sexual assault since the age of 16. I've also included some New Zealand statistics here. So according to the New Zealand Crime and Safety Survey from 2016, 24% of women and 6% of men have experienced sexual violence at least once in their lifetimes. These global findings can be compared with each other, yet we should note that there are different terms that are used and different time ranges captured. So for instance, the New Zealand survey asks about lifetime experiences of sexual violence, whereas the UK and Australian surveys ask about experiences of sexual assault since the age of 15 or 16. And as I'll show you in a moment, the Australian Human Rights Commission survey focuses on incidences that occurred in either 2015 or 2016. So what that does is it makes comparisons between these different data sets incredibly difficult. And the other complicating factor, before I move on to the next slide, that I want to just mention is that there's multiple meanings of the terms such as sexual violence, sexual assault, indecent assault, rape and sexual harassment. And these surveys don't always distinguish between those certain behaviours or experiences. So just to give you an idea, rape is considered to be a penetrative offences in most legal jurisdictions, but in some international jurisdictions, like in Scotland for instance, a rape can only occur if there's been penile penetration. But this definition of rape does not apply anywhere in Australia, where rape can involve penetration by other objects or bodily parts. Now, just to complicate matters further, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, which is a UN war crimes tribunal to deal with the 1994 Rwandan genocide, that tribunal defined rape as a physical invasion of a sexual nature, so a much more broad definition of rape. Now, rape is obviously rather complex, but sexual assault is far more nebulous and complex, I would argue, than the definition of rape. So, for example, the Australian Bureau of Statistics defines a sexual assault as a physical assault of a sexual nature that also includes rape. The Australian Human Rights Commission survey that I'll be talking about very shortly defines sexual assault to include a range of behaviours where a person is forced, coerced or tricked into sexual acts against their will or without their consent. The problem, though, is that in some legal and community contexts, rape and sexual assault are treated as separate behaviours, not as interchangeable, whereas in other contexts they are treated interchangeably. So this makes reporting on prevalence incredibly difficult, given we have different time ranges that are used and we also have different definitions of key terms. Okay, so the Australian Human Rights Commission's 2016 survey results on sexual harassment and sexual assault in Australian universities were released only a few weeks ago. I'm just going to sum up some of the key findings here. And please just note that I will be focusing on sexual assault statistics rather than sexual harassment, and this is only due to time constraints. Obviously, I see sexual harassment also as a very serious issue and one that needs to be addressed alongside sexual assault and rape in any future responses. So this survey, there were 31,000 students who responded to the survey out of about 300,000 that were contacted. There were 39 Australian universities represented. One of the key findings around sexual assault was that 6.9% of university students reported having been sexually assaulted on at least one occasion in 2015 or 2016. 1.6% of participants said that the sexual assault had occurred in a university setting, which included travelling to and from university, so for instance on public transport. It is clear from the survey that women experience sexual assault at disproportionately higher rates than men. So according to the survey, they were more than 3 times as likely to be sexually assaulted than men in 2015 and 2016. Also, interestingly, and consistent with these other broader surveys on sexual violence, is that overwhelmingly men were the perpetrators of sexual assault, and this was similar to sexual harassment as well. Students who identified as bisexual were more likely than those who identified as heterosexual or gay, lesbian and homosexual to have been sexually assaulted in a university setting. And although the sample sizes were small, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students and students with a disability were more likely to have been sexually assaulted in 2015 and 2016 than non-Indigenous students and students without a disability. And finally, another figure that I wanted to draw your attention to was the survey found that 22% of participants had experienced at least one form of technology-facilitated sexual harassment. So this is an area of research that I'm currently looking into. Online or technology-facilitated sexual harassment or sexual violence includes things like unwanted requests to talk about sex, to do something sexual or to engage in an intimate relationship. It might also include receiving unsolicited nude or sexually explicit images. It might also include the creation or distribution of images that have been photoshopped, drawn or manipulated to depict a victim in a sexual way. It includes websites where women and girls are slut-shamed on the basis of their physical appearance or their sexual behaviour. It includes online rape threats, and it also includes what I'd term image-based sexual abuse, and that involves the non-consensual taking or sharing of nude or sexual images, or the making of threats to share intimate images. So just to give you a quote that is obviously very disturbing from the Australian Human Rights Commission report called Change the Course, which captures some of the behaviours that we're seeing in our universities, and I'll read this out for you. A large group of guys had a pact where they would go out looking for drunk girls to hook up with, and when one of them succeeded, they would message the group and the rest of the guys would get back to the college room first and all pile in a closet, which had a huge gap you could see out of, waiting until the guy got back to the room with the girl, and the group of guys would watch, film the couple having sex without the girl having any knowledge of what was happening. The survey also revealed that a vast majority of students who were sexually assaulted or sexually harassed in 2015 and 2016 did not make a formal report or complaint to the university. So students were more likely to seek support from outside their university than from within the university. So let's look at these figures in a little bit more detail. First of all, 62% of students had little or no knowledge about where they could go to formally report or to make a complaint about a sexual assault. Of the students who were sexually assaulted in a university setting, 87% did not make a formal report or complaint to anyone at the university. Now, these figures are also quite consistent with what we know about underreporting in the community more broadly. The common reasons why university students chose not to report their experiences included the following factors. The most common was that participants did not believe that their experience was serious enough. The second was that they thought it would be too hard to prove the sexual assault. The third was that they did not know who to make the complaint to. And finally, they were worried about not being believed. Unfortunately, a number of students also reported negative experiences of reporting and seeking support. This included things like students being dissatisfied with the lack of action that was taken or not taken on behalf of the university. Some students felt that they were not being believed or they were being blamed by university staff. There were confidentiality breaches in reporting processes for some participants. For some participants, there was an inappropriate response to their disclosure, and I'll talk about that again in more detail. And finally, there was a lack of support that many participants reported. And I think this is really telling about the problems that we have in our universities today around sexual assault and sexual harassment. That only 4% of students who took the survey thought their university was doing enough to provide and to promote clear and accessible information on sexual assault procedures, policies and support services. So clearly highlighting the need for urgent action and change in this area. So I've been focusing heavily on statistics, and I am aware that, you know, they are numbers and there are personal stories behind these numbers. And what I find is more impactful for me on a personal level, and for many of you as well today, are the personal stories told by the victim survivors. These stories were told through the online submissions to the Australian Human Rights Commission that were also included in the survey report. And I've included a few here that capture the complex and intersecting barriers to reporting sexual violence. So I'll just read these out for you. It all seemed too complex, and I felt like I'd been complicit somehow because I hadn't set firm enough boundaries or been vocal enough in my opposition to what he was doing. I felt ashamed of what had happened and scared that no one would believe me or want to listen. And the next quote is, it took me over a year to realise I wasn't at fault, and even so I'm still reluctant to tell people for fear of being blamed or told I'm overacting. And the third quote, I didn't contact the university or residential college I was in at the time. From everything I'd heard about the boy, he was a nice guy, probably with a huge sense of entitlement, but didn't deserve his life ruined. And the final quote here, I didn't report the incident to anyone because the industry is very tight-knit, and causing a fuss or making trouble with a fellow student who could one day become a colleague in the industry could really ruin opportunities for me in the future. Here's a few more quotes from the report. In my mind, rape occurred in dark alleys, not with people you knew. It took me months to report the incident at my university as I had no idea where to go in spite of having studied there for 6 years. And the university favours informal procedures rather than disciplinary action. I had no interest in entering into a process with the university, having to tell the university my story and potentially losing control over it, having my experiences questioned only to have the perpetrator apologise. So one way of thinking about how we might respond better to sexual violence in our universities, but also in our community more broadly, is through the lens of prevention. So thinking about primary prevention, secondary prevention and tertiary prevention. I'll just go through this table very quickly. Primary prevention is best defined as interventions designed to prevent sexual violence before it occurs. The aim is to reduce or eliminate drivers of sexual violence, so they include like interpersonal factors such as alcohol use, an adverse childhood experience on behalf of the perpetrator. They might also include cultural drivers of sexual violence, so attitudes and beliefs around gender and sexuality and sexual violence, and also structural drivers of sexual violence might include poverty and other factors. The examples of interventions from primary prevention programs include consent and respectful relationships education and bystander programs. Secondary prevention is best defined as interventions that are designed to mitigate against further instances of sexual violence. The aims of secondary prevention really are around early identification and intervention, so for those who are most at risk of perpetrating sexual violence, but also those who are most at risk of experiencing victimisation. Examples of secondary prevention interventions include policies and standards. They also include training for staff. They also include bystander programs and other educational programs that are designed to target those at risk of both perpetration and victimisation. So for instance, they could include assertiveness training, for instance, or self-defence programs. And finally, tertiary prevention is best defined as interventions that take place after sexual violence has occurred. The aim of tertiary prevention is to ensure the safety of victim survivors, to provide victims and survivors support, and also to ensure perpetrator accountability. So some examples of tertiary prevention interventions can include counselling, mediation between survivors and perpetrators. That includes sanctions, criminal justice responses, but also restorative justice processes as well. And since the screening of the Hunting Ground documentary, there's been a massive shift in local and international awareness and attention to the issue of sexual violence, which has been a long time coming. This is now an opportunity for universities to be leaders in the community in terms of addressing the issue of sexual violence, which isn't just a problem within the university setting, but it's also a problem more broadly in society as a whole. As educational centres, universities are well placed to address this problem. And the measures should include things like around awareness, support, education, prevention and responses or remedies. And these can be roughly mapped out onto this prevention model that I've just provided. Now, due to time constraints, I've got about 5 minutes left. I'm not able to comprehensively summarise all of the recommendations that were made by the Australian Human Rights Commission and also by academics, practitioners and advocacy groups in terms of what needs to happen. But I have got a bit of a summary about what needs to happen, where we need to go from here. Sorry, there's a lot of text on this slide. I'll just go through each dot point at a time, so if you can just kind of focus on one at a time, that would be great. Thank you. So the first is around strong leadership, and the implementation of recommendations is considered to be vital in terms of addressing this issue. The second is the clear and accessible policies and reporting procedures, especially in relation to residential communities, but also in relation to the student-staff interactions in postgraduate environments. The residential halls and colleges are particularly concerning because of the culture of hypermasculinity and excessive alcohol consumption, which essentially operate within a culture of impunity for sexual violence. We also need appropriate punishments for perpetrators. Now, perpetrators, as many of you will know, often look and act like ordinary guys, And many victim survivors worry about whether their peer groups and community more broadly will blame them or will think if they kind of pursue punishment of perpetrators that they will be ostracised within their communities. So this is one of the major reasons for underreporting, as well as why there's a lack of accountability for perpetrators, and it's an issue that needs much more attention into the future. The third dot point I have, or maybe the fourth dot point, sorry, on the slide is around awareness raising of support services and reporting procedures for staff and students through the Respect Now Always campaign. This should include an appropriate advice and information to survivors, both staff and students, through a comprehensive and trauma-informed website that uses the correct and inclusive language. There also needs to be a suite of justice options available to victim survivors. As I've already mentioned, some victim survivors will not want to go down the criminal justice pathway, whereas others will, and there does need to be a clear presentation of different justice options. In addition, and probably one of the most important things is around respectful relationships educational programs that use multi-session, interactive and blended learning approaches that are trauma-informed and survivor-centric. These programs need to address the problematic community attitudes towards gender, sex, sexuality and gendered violence. They need to fundamentally position gender inequality at the heart of the problem of gendered violence, and they need to include domestic and family violence as well, in my belief. They also need to address bystanders who may provide the explicit and implicit support to problematic attitudes and beliefs and behaviours. So we need to really make sure that the blame and responsibility is shifted onto perpetrators who are often rendered invisible in much of the discussion of this problem. There needs to be follow-up research on attitudes, behaviours, prevalence, impacts and responses. So there's suggestions that include regular monitoring, evaluation, audits and more research, in particular in relation to residential colleges. We need to make sure that we provide the appropriate caring and compassionate responses to students and staff who have experienced sexual violence from a diversity of backgrounds. And this should also include the mandatory training of university counsellors in responding to disclosures of sexual violence, and clear referral pathways include knowledge of external services and those different justice options to survivors. We also need to make sure we've got specialist training for counsellors, staff and students in terms of how to respond to both sexual assault and sexual harassment. And there has been a recommendation that we need to identify staff members and student representatives within institutions who are most likely to receive disclosures of sexual violence. So that leads me to the point about universities need to ensure that these staff members and student representatives receive training in responding to disclosures of sexual assault and sexual harassment that are delivered by external organisations with specialist expertise in this area. And this leads me to my last slide, and I promise I'll be a minute wrapping all of that, or a couple of minutes wrapping this up. So just to end, as I've already mentioned, one of the most important issues is that we need a comprehensive and well-resourced approach to responding to disclosures of sexual violence. Currently, there is a high chance that students may disclose to a member of staff, as identified by the university's UK report Changing the Culture, where the staff member doesn't know what to do or how to refer the student on. Courtney Ahrens, a US academic, I like this quote. It captures what the dangers in not responding adequately to a disclosure of sexual violence. And I'll read this quote out here. When rape survivors are exposed to victim blaming behaviours or attitudes, the experience may feel like a sexual assault or a second rape. Speaking out about the assault may therefore have detrimental consequences for rape survivors, as they are subjected to further trauma at the hands of the very people they turn to help. And I've also ashamedly included a quote from my conversation article that states that universities have a duty of care to students and staff regardless of whether rape or sexual assault took place, and regardless of whether the perpetrator was a student or staff member at the time of the assault. And I bring that up because I think there has been, rightly so, a lot of attention to sexual assaults on campus, but Students also experience sexual assaults, and staff as well, off campus, and need to also be given that appropriate support when they make those disclosures. So just to wrap up, the Epigeum's Responding to Disclosures of Sexual Violence course is really timely and important. As Annie and Tessa mentioned at the beginning, I've been involved as an external reviewer of the content, ensuring that the content is relevant to Australian audiences and reflects accurately the legal situation on rape, sexual assault and sexual harassment in Australia. I've been particularly interested in the content around digital technologies and the perpetration of sexual violence. The course is a great resource that will help participants understand the highly complex nature of sexual violence, so the physical, psychological and social impacts, the barriers to reporting, the reasons for underreporting, the different definitions of rape, sexual assault and sexual harassment, and the range of applicable laws. The course also provides hands-on practical advice on how to respond to a disclosure of sexual violence. So what questions to ask, how to be supportive, caring and compassionate, and what avenues of support and investigation are available to survivors. So I'm going to leave you now with Tessa, who will do a much better job of summarising the course content, and I look forward to the Q&A session soon. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks very much, Nicola. So just before we move on to Tessa's presentation, we wanted to ask a bit more about your context and the type of training available at your institution. So I'll just bring up the final poll of the presentation. So we kind of want to find out a bit more about how much training you have received on how to respond appropriately. A significant amount, some, not very much, or perhaps none. Okay, so I think we've had most of the results in. So I'll just share those results with you now. So as you can see, the majority is 32% have said some training, 25% a significant amount, and 14% not very much, and 29% none. So it's quite spread results there. Okay, so that leads very nicely into Tessa's presentation. So I'll just hand over to her now.
Great, thank you very much, Annie, and thank you, Nicola. So these results are very interesting, and clearly there is a spread, very different experiences, probably depending on your institution or your role. So yeah, I've worked on the Responding to Disclosure of Sexual Violence programme over the last year. As Nicola mentioned, it is an online course providing practical, university-wide training on the first response to a disclosure, exploring legal boundaries, common misperceptions and the needs of survivors. We published it in Australia in June, and we're currently in the process of looking to update the course as a result of the Australian survey. So I won't spend too much time on this slide, which explains why we decided to develop such a course. And Nicola's covered a lot of this. But very quickly, I don't really need to reiterate, universities do face a major challenge in addressing sexual assault, not just in Australia, internationally. And it really is quite striking there in the second row, just the lack of appropriate training for staff and the percentage of students who thought that the university was doing enough to provide and promote accessible information. So yeah, the statistic Nicola mentioned too, 4% of students thought that the university was doing enough. It's very important that universities provide staff with clear guidance to minimise the impact on those involved, whether staff members or students. It is very important also in terms of universities' reputations. We would like our course to help avoid any mishandling that could compromise any investigations or expose an institution to legal action and reputational damage. And the expectations are from parents, from students. They want university campuses, university environments to be safe spaces. And as the report has highlighted too, universities are now going to be expected to actively promote change and develop training or education plans for all staff and students. Why is an online course an appropriate way to help address the issue? Well, an online course can help to scale up training quickly, efficiently and flexibly. It can ensure that all staff and student leaders across all sites, so whether spread geographically or in many different departments, all sites, all staff will receive a consistent level of training. And by having something online, which is flexible, it will also free up time to train specialists at face-to-face workshops. So what we're doing, as I will move on to the next slide, is providing a foundation for everybody. The Responding to Disclosures course is for everybody, from senior management to lecturers to librarians to porters, and also for student leaders, for example, within the student union. It is likely, and as has been mentioned already, recommended that some staff are specially trained to handle issues, but it really should be emphasised that absolutely anybody can receive a disclosure, and everyone needs to be equipped with the skills to respond appropriately, empathetically and confidently. RDSV, just to use the acronym, will provide fundamental university-wide training on the first response to a disclosure, and again, by having an online resource, you'll be able to reach a much wider staff body than than you can in a workshop, just due to space and resource constraints. So we were very, very lucky to have this expert panel of advisors and author. It was led in the UK by Nicole Westmarland, Director of the Durham Centre for Research into Violence and Abuse and a Professor of Criminology in the School of Applied Sciences. In Australia, we had Dr Corinne Manning at La Trobe University and Professor Andrew Macaulay, Deputy Vice-Chancellor at Southern Cross University. The author was Kay Davis, an experienced consultant and trainer who had spent most of her career at Rape Crisis in England. And then we had our expert reviewers, so Nicola Henry was incredible to work with, really, really helpful, providing us with invaluable Australian advice. We also had Dr Alice Prochaska, Principal of Somerville College at Oxford, Professor Claire McGlynn, Professor of Law at Durham University, and Dr Manuel Alonso, Director of Student Services at Loughborough University in the UK. Our development group of universities, so the universities who worked with us in the creation of the course, included ANU, Charles Sturt University, University of Greenwich in the UK, University of East Anglia in the UK, and the University of Newcastle, Australia. So to move on to exactly what RDSV is. It is a single course with 4 modules. Approximately there's 90 to 100 minutes of core content. So core content includes the content on screen, the online activity, and also 5 workshop activities which amount to roughly around 3 hours. So these workshop activities provide ideas for face-to-face training as well. We very much believe in multiple approaches to training, and so should you at an institution want to take a certain topic further, want to work with staff on a face-to-face level, these activities can help complement the online content of RDSV. This next slide provides an outline of the modules. So the first module is setting the context. That really looks at the prevalence of sexual violence in society within the student community. It also explores the idea of normalisation and why certain behaviour is accepted or tolerated and seen to be just normal. And it also examines the misuse of social media. The second module, Understanding Sexual Violence, challenges the myths and misconceptions. And it also looks at what is consent, what's the definition, and then linked to that, what is sexual violence, what are the sexual offences, and how are they defined. In the third module, Understanding and Supporting Survivors, we delve a little further into the barriers, why people don't disclose and why survivors may not want to report. We also look at the impact of sexual violence on survivors, the treatment and support options, and reacting to a disclosure. So Module 3 is much more about, it's about the human reaction, the emotions, so how you interact with the survivor, how they feel, and how you, as a potential responder, should or should not react in that first instance. Module 4 takes this further, so it's steps to take when responding. It is more like the technical handbook. So once you have, somebody has disclosed to you exactly what are the steps that you should take, the practical things. So we cover creating an appropriate space. We go further into care pathways, looking at the support options and the reporting options. So internal reporting, external reporting. We have a screen also on the alleged perpetrator. Of course, at universities you have the duty of care to all students and all staff members. And so how exactly do you deal with that balance? We look at preserving evidence, recording the disclosure, and importantly, looking after yourself. So, of course, it's a traumatic topic, and what can you do to ensure that you yourself are okay? So this slide here just shows the learning outcomes of the course. I'll quickly run through them. By completing RDSV, participants will be able to demonstrate an awareness of the issues and initiatives around sexual violence, both in higher education institutions and in wider society. They will be able to define what constitutes consent and identify the legal definitions of sexual offences. They'll be able to dispel common myths and misconceptions. They will be able to react and respond to survivors appropriately, demonstrating empathy and establishing boundaries. They will be able to explain the different support and reporting options available. They will be able to demonstrate best practices for responding to a disclosure and apply these to their context and in line with their institutional policy. And they will, as I said, recognise when they, the responder, may need support in dealing with a disclosure. There are certain key features which appear throughout the course, throughout all 4 modules. Firstly, interactive comprehension activities. And these are really intended to inspire confidence and check understanding of key concepts and best practices, including support options and care pathways. In my little walkthrough that I'll do in a minute, I will show you a couple of these. We also have scenario-based activities. We believe scenarios are hugely important in helping participants to engage with the topic and to reflect on their own context and how they might react in certain situations. We have customizable Your Context pods. So these are little boxes, which again I'll show you in my demo, which can be populated with your own institutional policies, your own advice, your own local support service details, and so on. We have a couple of animations to convey some of the common myths of sexual violence and the barriers to reporting. And finally, we have included some interviews and a video role play with professionals trained in responding to disclosures. So that leads me on to the demonstration. I will quickly show you some of the screens and exactly how the course works. So this screen here is the screen you might see if you've downloaded and accessed the course. You would click onto it and it would take you to the landing page here. Now I'll start off with screen 1A. This is the first screen of the first module, setting the context. This module explores the prevalence of sexual violence, as I mentioned, and the ways it might be normalised. At the top, we include estimated screen duration here, so that users have an idea of how long each screen will take to complete. So in this case, it's around 3 minutes. Now, throughout the course, we have aimed to keep the screens short. The average screen time is about 4 minutes. In the core section of the screen, so that's this middle section here, we have an In the News activity, featuring articles that consider some of the issues around sexual violence and the initiatives being used to tackle it. Following this, there is a multiple choice quiz that includes further facts and figures. While we recognise the seriousness of the topic throughout the course, we do highlight the positive initiatives that already exist and the steps that users can take to help make a difference. It's important to underline that the course is about empowering staff to respond effectively and in turn about empowering survivors. So let me just return to the top of the screen. You'll see here an icon. We use icons to flag key themes that run throughout the course. They signify information that users can apply to their own institution, the positive steps they can take, and here a self-care, wherever self-care strategies might be important. Also on the right-hand side, you will notice these pods. These clickable boxes include further material relevant to the information in the core part of the screen. For example, definitions of key terms, as shown here. So this is how we use these terms. Links to useful resources or downloadable documents. On many of the screens, we have your context pods. So I mentioned that these are customizable, and they allow and guide users to check specific university policies, local support services, key links, and key contacts. I'll just show you an example on this next screen. So the screen B, 1B, normalization. Here's a useful links pod, and at the bottom, this is what a your context pod looks like. So we fill it with quite generic advice, and they can be customized accordingly. Returning to the top of this normalization screen, I'll just show you this activity here. This is a labelled graphic activity in which we show how unwelcome, sexualised or objectifying behaviour can be normalised within student culture. So users can scroll through this mock-up of a social media newsfeed, click on the different images and read the descriptions. The posts represent examples of materials or activities that can exist in and around student communities. Following this, we include an interactive poll activity where users can select whether they have ever been concerned by anything they have seen or heard at their institution. They can see how their experience compares to that of their peers here, but importantly, answers submitted do remain anonymous. Okay, let's look at another screen. I've chosen this screen here from Module 3, Barriers to Disclosing and Reporting. So, as I discussed, Module 3 looks at the psychological and physical impact of sexual violence on individuals, and it outlines how to react to a disclosure appropriately. Starting off the module, we have an animation, and this covers the barriers. So why survivors might not want to disclose a report, and I'll just play you a quick sample.
A survivor of sexual violence needs support, but for a survivor, asking for this support might not seem easy.
Many fears and concerns can prevent them from telling anyone. They might question whether it was their fault. They might worry they will be judged. They might fear acknowledging the physical impact.
Myths about
It's worth mentioning here that every video and audio has a transcript underneath, and actually that every screen excuse me, has a text print version. Alongside animations and interactive activities, we include diverse scenario-based activities to help illustrate key points and to encourage users to think about how they might act in certain realistic situations. So to illustrate this, I've selected a screen from, again, Module 3. This is Scenario 1, Reacting to a Disclosure. Now, this one here focuses on an unhelpful reaction to a disclosure. Of course, there is no one way to react, but there are recommended best practices, and here the scenario illustrates how Jill, a staff member, falls into certain traps. And underneath, we just summarise the do nots. This screen is then followed by a second scenario in which it's the same scenario but in which the reaction is appropriate and the response, Jill's response, is recommended. After this scenario, we have a video interview in which trained professionals provide advice and share their own experiences. And we also have a video role play which again demonstrates best practices when responding to a survivor. I'll just play the first part of the interview.
I think it's really important just to keep all your attention on that person, not be worried about if you're going to say the right thing or not. It's just about the person in front of you, and also just letting them take their time.
Okay, finally I will show you a section of Module 4. This last module looks beyond the initial reaction and focuses on the practical steps. It looks at the issues surrounding reporting, the boundaries of your responsibilities, and so on. This screen here is Care Pathways. It covers the possible support and reporting options for survivors. We emphasise that participants, we emphasise that a lot of staff members taking the course are unlikely to need to know about all these options in detail. But the information presented here will help any user to answer any initial questions that a survivor might have. The staff member will then in turn be able to help survivors to decide what they are most comfortable doing. Now, the first, this tabbing activity provides a clear, concise comparison of the services that are typically available. And then underneath we have a comprehension activity which helps users to apply their knowledge of support options and ask them to select the best option for the survivor in each scenario. Again, you will notice the Your Context pods here, which can be customised according to your own needs or contact details at the institution. There is much more I could show you, but I think time's running on and I should stop there. So I hope this demonstration has given you a good taste of the course content and some of the pedagogical features. And if you do have any questions, please ask now or do get in touch at a later date. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, Tessa. So I'll just go on to the final screen. So you can see our contact details here, and some of you may have been in touch with us regarding our consent matters and responding to disclosures courses. We can give you a lot of information regards to pricing and how the courses can work for your institution. So please do contact us if you have any questions at all. We're also able to provide you with a free trial if you'd like to get a feel for how the courses look and function. So thanks very much for attending this webinar today. I hope you have a good rest of the day and we look forward to hearing from you. So goodbye everyone. Thanks very much.